We are streaming.
We're live. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's really nice to see you all here. And I'd like to welcome our newcomers. We have three of you tonight. And I guess we scared away some others. Who knows? I doubt it. They'll be back. Not everybody makes it every week.
I
That's a
turned
good
mine off
idea.
before I
No,
left
it's
this
this
time.
one.
Let's all check our
No, it's
phasers,
this
make
one.
sure your phasers are on standby. Oh, that's the house phone.
Do we have a way of turning that down?
No, just keep it over there. Just put it over there.
I think mine's in the car.
How about we put it in the back and cover it?
It's actually the base unit that makes it. Sorry, audience. Thought we were ready. The phone rang. So, for those of you who don't know, my name is Golden Eagle, and I am a teacher in this particular lineage of the Toltec knowledge. And we're here, and we're going to talk about some Toltec history, and we're going to talk about how we engage, how the ancient Toltecs engaged with this lineage and what it means, and then how we can use that information in modern times. And feel free to ask questions anytime you want. Does anybody have a question before we start? Yes.
I was curious earlier, like what about yourself in terms of like what initially attracted you to this discipline and train of thought?
Wow.
Your journey a little bit?
Yeah, my journey. We've got some new folks here, so I think that would be appropriate. So my journey is,
Jessica.
yay, Jessica's here.
And Louie.
Yay!
And
so
Louie.
Oh,
You
they're
might have
both
to
here.
unload
that.
Can we do
We can, Louie, you might want to bring this a chair just inside of the massage room right here. So you might want to just pull into this space.
Welcome, everybody.
Perfect timing, you
And
guys.
once again, there are
This one
cushions in the corner back here for anyone comfy with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it, right there, but not on the paper.
Louis, right?
So my interest all my life was math and science. I remember being told, I probably shouldn't have been, that out of the however many hundred people we had in our school district, there was a statewide math test. This was like 7th or 8th grade, and out of the whole school district, I had the highest score. So math and science has always been my thing. And it was just a question of which math science field I was going to go into. And so I went to college. I couldn't make up my mind, so I double majored in physics and astronomy, had a minor in math. And college is where I learned that I was not a mathematician. No matter how good I am at actually using math, mathematicians are weird. They sit there and they look at the same equation and they ponder it and they do all the same. Well, you can't do that because the theory says this, and I'm like, you can't use it for anything. What good is it? And so, in the course of my physics studies, I found out that all the best mathematicians in the world throughout the history of time, I'm going out on a limb there, are physicists, because we're the ones who use it for something practical. So I found I'm a more practical person. I went into physics and later into engineering, and I was going to go to graduate school in astronomy, but then my senior year, because of the way NASA did budget cuts, the bottom fell out of the astronomy market. They were suddenly producing 2,000 PhD astronomers a year for 100 job openings. And I looked at that and I went, where did the money go? Oh, the space shuttle. So that's where I worked on the space shuttle program, and for a large satellite manufacturer. Somewhere in there, my interest in science got me hooked on the history of science. And so I started reading about all the science done by ancient Romans, and then the ancient Greeks, and then the ancient Egyptians. And somewhere in all of that, I started finding all the obscure references to things like, oh, there was electricity in Baghdad in 2000 BC. Wait, what? And I read, it's like, oh yeah, a little clay jar, It was lined with an electrolyte material. It had a wooden lid with a metal rod going down into it, and then a metal clip that hooked to the lining of the jar. And at some point, somebody was looking at it, it's some unknown ritual object. Even this Toltec archaeology book that we're reading here makes light of the fact that whenever an archaeologist can't figure anything out, it's categorized as an unknown ritual object. So this unknown ritual object, somebody decided, I think I know what this is. So they made a replica of it. They took a clay pot about the same size, lined it with the same kind of material, which they tested and found that it was a conductive material. They put the wooden lid in, they put the metal rods on, they hooked it up, they filled it up with an electrolyte solution of salt water, and it's a 1.5 volt battery.
Amazing.
The D cell battery in your flashlight is a 1.5 volt battery. So are C's and AA's and AAA's and all of that. So that didn't fit. And so I started, wow, that was really weird. And then I started finding out ancient airplanes and ancient thises and ancient that's and brain surgeries in the Amazon jungles that healed, and people would live decades after their brain surgeries. And I'm like, something's amiss. And so that got me looking. That led me into the world of alternative healing, indirectly. I also got involved in martial arts. And the energy and all of that, I eventually left the aerospace industry where I was building satellites, and I went to naturopathic medical school and then to acupuncture school and became a holistic doctor. And that was going great, and I thought, okay, I'm done. And in the fullness of time, but I was also drawn by some of the references of all this weird stuff I was reading, that it all seemed to revolve around spirituality of some sort. And I'm somebody who fired organized religion in the first grade. And that's a whole long story we don't need to go into tonight. But basically, when you're a minister and somebody asks you a question that's a legitimate question, if you're any ministers watching, don't tell that young child to sit down, shut up, and stop asking questions. Didn't work for me. So I left organized religion, but I was always looking for something, and I never even questioned why I was looking. So I go off through adulthood. I'm an engineer, rocket scientist guy, and then I'm a natural doctor guy, but I'm always looking. And once I got into the holistic medical community, I started meeting all these people who knew all this stuff about spirituality, and it's like, wow, it was blowing my mind. And I was reading all this stuff, and I remember when Shirley MacLaine came out of the closet and wrote her books, and I read a few of them, and it's like, well, now what? And I was looking. And I was still this left brain scientist guy, right? It had to be logical, and so I had drawn a matrix, of course, of every spiritual system I could find and what they had in common. And so there was a short list of 6 or 8 things that every legitimate religion, spiritual system seemed to have in common, like, a belief in one God. Love is the answer, kind of thing, and down this list. And so that became my code. And as I was continuing to read, I found more and more things that validated that. And I remember the first heavy duty reading and material that I found was Helena Blavatsky, if anybody has read her work. She was one of the founders of the Theosophical movement back in roughly the 1870s. In England and later India and the US, and then they all kind of fragmented and went their own way, as those things do. But then that opened up a whole other door into this whole other world of esoteric spirituality, and that's what I was attempting to study and learn more of and filter out the good stuff from the fluffy stuff. And then I met Bonnie, so it's her fault.
Something about wanting a mind-blowing experience.
Well, you
right?
throw that in the face.
Touche.
What happened was, when my first practice marriage ended, through another long story we won't go into tonight, I found a spiritual dating site And I was guided through that by that deep, dark voice in your head. You know, the one you hear when you're not on the right track. And I ended up in a spiritual dating site, and I found Bonnie, and she was studying with this crazy El Salvadorian Toltec shaman. And he was doing something with this energy. And I'm like, oh, energy? What is this energy of which you speak? And I hadn't heard of it. You know, it's like I've got 20 years of martial arts and Qigong and Tai Chi and acupuncture and all this stuff in my arsenal, right? And I'd never heard of this. So, like, I had to learn about this. And so I met the shaman and this energy. And after 15 years of Qigong and Tai Chi and acupuncture, I made more progress with energy in 1 month with the Akadua than I had in the previous 15 years combined. And it's like, that got my attention. And so I started going to more of his discussions and presentations. And next thing you know, I'm a formal student. And the next thing you know, some years later, I'm graduating from the shaman school, and he's throwing me out. It's like, okay, you got to go teach now. So that's how I got here. A very circuitous path, and it's part of my destiny to be here. Somewhere along the line in this, we often receive little synchronistic inputs from the universe. And we have a choice to listen and follow those synchronistic events that the universe conspired to put right in our path so we don't miss them, or not. And, you know, I'd done some reading. I was still in that fluffy stuff transitioning into the heavy duty stuff phase. And right after Bonnie and I met, we went on a vacation, and that's always the test. Okay, you think you found the one, go on a road trip together. If you survive the road trip, then it'll be okay. And so we didn't just survive, we thrived on that road trip. So we had come up from Southern California to Mount Shasta. We'd gone camping on the mountain. And then we'd gone over to the coast. I was doing some salmon fishing on a river over there, and met a guy I'm still friends with. And he told me how to find his super secret salmon fishing spot. And he was there, had been there earlier that day and had a really nice monster salmon he was going home with. And I went down there, and he even gave me his secret lure. He said, mail it back to me when you're done with it. And I went down there for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I was flogging that water with that super secret lure. And I don't know, I just didn't have the knack that day. I watched at least a dozen salmon follow that lure in, and then as soon as they could see me, they would run away. I was like, ugh. So I was crouching down behind a bush. Nothing, didn't get anything. So I was on a little narrow sandbar where two rivers come together, and I walked out this little trail through the scrub brush, and there's only one way in and one way out. And so I walked out there, I fished, I caught nothing. Got a few mosquito bites, turned and walked out, and laying right in the trail, right in plain sight. It would have been impossible to walk this way on my way out and not see it if it had been there, was an eagle feather.
Wow.
And I picked it up and go, oh wow, that's kind of cool. Sometimes people have these weird synchronistic happenings, and they get this gift from nature, and it means they'll become a shaman. It's like, oh, well, okay. And yeah, I wonder why I got it.
And a golden eagle feather, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I don't remember seeing any golden eagles. Now, yeah, the eagles come down, they fish, they whatever. But it was a golden eagle feather. And that was when I was being told, guess what? Your world's about to change. It's sort of like that scene in The Matrix when he takes the red pill and everything starts to, it's like there's no going back, right? So.
The red pill was Bonnie.
Oh, I think I took it a long time before that. But she was certainly a major catalyst. And the mind-blowing experience thing was in my profile on this spiritual dating site where we met. I had, hey puppy, I had said something about wanting a mind-blowing experience. Okay.
So I need to remind him about that on a regular basis. When he's, what is going on?
So how big was the feather that you got?
Oh, I don't carry it around. I keep it at home on my altar. It's about like this. It was a
Wow.
good sized,
It's nice and fat.
And
yeah,
it's fat?
perfect
Beautiful.
condition, mint condition.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was my calling. So, why shamanism? I didn't understand at the time. You know, when I found the feather, I didn't understand the first few years. But every culture throughout history, see, I told you we'd get to history, has had different writings, different sacred writings, that we now loosely refer to as illuminated manuscripts, meaning the person who wrote them down was being inspired, was hearing the voice of God or the prophets or the angels or some divine knowledge that has been put here to help humanity. I don't want to segue too far off about why humanity was here and why we needed help. That's a whole other story. But it's a valid one, so if somebody wants to write that down and ask it another time, that's fine. The illuminated manuscripts are all kind of written in code. If you look at the pages of a lot of them, now many of these came from Mesoamerica, and the Spanish. Where's my Spaniard tonight? Oh, she probably got mad at me. I told the truth about the Spanish last week. So,
No, she's cool.
no, she's good. But anyway, the Spanish burned a lot of them, and the Aztecs actually burned a lot of the ones that they found from the older cultures, the Olmecs and the Toltecs. But they're written with text and then a lot of illustrations. Right? So most sacred writings have at least 3 ways that they can be analyzed. There's the story that you see. So and so begat so and then 302 years later, somebody did this and that and that. Then there's the esoteric meaning of what's in the text. It's behind that. And that's where the quote, you need to have eyes to see and ears to hear comes in. And you can tell when you're reading that there's something key at this point or this point or this point, because there's often incongruities in logic. There's something about the flow that changes. It would be like going through a nice rhyming poem and all of a sudden the next word at the end of the line doesn't rhyme. Wait, that felt odd. That's your clue to go look and meditate on something higher about that passage in that material. And the illuminated manuscripts then, yeah, there was stuff maybe in the text, maybe not. Some of the later ones, especially in medieval Europe, were written where the text was absolutely meaningless. It was the pictures. It was the artwork around the edges. And you look at these, it's like if you look out of like an average 8.5 by 11 paper, the text would just be in this little box in the middle and everything else is pictures or the first letter of the paragraph, and it's all big and ornate, and there's all these other artworks just to decorate the page, and you're reading this little thing here, right? No, this around the edges, that's where the secret stuff is. That's where the hidden stuff is. And so yes, there's higher meanings to all that artwork. There's an esoteric language that you can learn and a way of looking. And one of the keys to the esoteric artwork in particular, and especially Toltec artwork. Toltecs, one of the 3 things for which they're most famous is their artwork. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But in order to understand the artwork, you need to look at it and analyze it from the perspective of the higher energetic planes and our higher energetic bodies. So we have the physical plane, and then we go up to the etheric and the astral, the mental, and the causal, and on up from there. And each one of those planes exists right here, but at a different frequency, so we don't see it. Does the dog need a little bit of water?
No, she's just playing in her room.
Oh, she's playing, okay. So the, for every one of those higher planes, we have a body, an energy body. We have an etheric body, we have an astral body, we have a mental body, we have a causal body. And once you start getting up there, they're very diffuse. We refer to them as the bodies of light. And it takes a while to work to where you're controlling consciously your etheric and your astral and your mental. And so that's a process that takes time. And there's a number of reasons for that. Why you can't, I agree with Jean's thing, and just do it. So when you start to understand and start to read these higher sacred writings that talk about the higher planes, and you start to do the kind of meditations where you're looking at that, one of the things that becomes clear over time is that of all the spiritual fields that there are who truly embrace the concept of this esoteric knowledge, the general field of shamanism is the field that takes that knowledge out of the realm of the purely theoretical and brings it into the practical. Shamanism as a whole, and shamans throughout time have done this, is they learn to navigate these higher planes and these higher spaces, and to go get information and bring it back in a usable format, and to make changes in those higher planes that will ripple down and have changes, positive changes here, we hope. Not every shaman is serving the light. They're just like any field you go into, there's going to be the light and the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, in the esoteric world, anybody who's following the dark path, we refer to as a black shaman or a black magician. And anybody who's following the light, we refer to as a light shaman or a light shaman or a light magician. And it has nothing to do with skin color, it has nothing to do with gender.
It's just like voodoo, right?
Yeah, I would say that's largely following the dark path.
Mhm.
The one key thing that makes that determination is, are you using your powers to interfere with the rights and the life of somebody else? Once you cross that line, you're a dark magician, dark shaman. That's why when we teach the healing work with the energy, we're big on ethics, we're big on, you have to get permission to do work on something. So, shamanism, therefore, is the great equalizer. It's an equalizer between ages, it's an equalizer between genders, it's an equalizer between races. Coyote is Hispanic, Choro is a Native American. Doesn't matter. Only thing that matters is, can you do it? You learn how to do it, you learn these shamanic skills, you become a shaman. Doesn't matter. Gender, we don't care. Hair color, we don't care.
Except for Sarah, it's gotta match her shirt.
No, I think the blue, when you look at the spectrum and where that is, I think that's actually helping her. So for her, hair color is important. And so watch, she'll come with a different color next week, just to annoy. So for me, there's several key events, most of which I didn't cover, that were those little branch points. You go this way, you go this way, and your whole life becomes different. I remember being in second or third grade and being read the Robert Frost poem, about the road not taken, the road less traveled by. Two roads diverged on the yellow wood. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And that really resonated with me at a very young age. And at some point in my life, I realized every time I had a major decision to make, I was taking the road less traveled by. I always avoided the masses. All my friends would think I'm nuts. They'd stop talking to me. And when I left aerospace, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a brain surgeon? Oh no, I'm going to be a naturopath. Oh, well, let me go sit on the other side of the room now and stop talking to you. Okay. They thought that was just whacked out. Because how can I go from being a scientist to do something so unscientific in their minds? And the answer is it's a lot more scientific than most conventional medicine, to be perfectly honest. So when I looked at, one of those branch points was at first grade Sunday school class when I was told to sit down, shut up, and stop asking questions. It got me looking.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me the freedom, and my parents supported my decision not to go back. Thank you, Dad. And that got me looking in a way that was unfettered by rules of a dogmatic religion. I didn't have priests threatening me with excommunication because I was reading the wrong book. Ex-wife did that, but you can tell how well that worked. It worked very well. And so when I looked at all of these out there and I started gravitating to the ones that resonated, and I had found not just shamanism in general, but the Toltec shamanic path in particular, it's like, okay, I'm home. The Toltec path has a history, and we have pieces of knowledge that are found in no other spiritual system that are extremely powerful. Just this energy, for those of you who are unaware or new here tonight, we deal with this energy called the Akadwa, and there's a whole story behind why this ancient Toltec energy has an Egyptian name, and I'm not going to go into that tonight, but it's in the book, and some of it's on our website. So this idea of using a subtle energy like chi, like prana, only many times stronger, is not just for healing. It's also for spiritual use. It's like if engineering works for any of you newcomers, it's like the subcarrier wave over which you multiplex the data on a satellite uplink. Okay? So Akadwa is a much stronger carrier wave. And when you use that to make contact with your own higher states of consciousness, whether you call it your higher self, your essential self, your I am presence, your holy guardian angel, doesn't matter what name you use, that link, that communication, the possibility is much stronger with the Akadwa than without it. And so the ancient Toltecs called the Akadwa, they simply refer to it as the power, as if there was any other one. It's just, no, it's the power. And they developed it and they refined it over the centuries. And when the Toltec culture finally fell in the 900s AD, the priesthood caste that held this power and held this knowledge of how to use it for spiritual growth and transformation, they were sent into hiding, by hiding mostly in plain sight. So they would blend in with whatever culture was there. They would just, do their blacksmithing or candle making by day, and in secret they would continue to develop this power, this energy, and pass it on. They would, under orders, keep a very small group and pass on the knowledge, be very careful who you select. So you saw a lot of it transmitted through families, fathers and mothers to sons and daughters, and so forth. Because you had a much better chance that most of the time, not all the time, that your offspring would help keep it secret and help keep it moving forward. So the Toltec culture historically, as I mentioned, was famous for artwork. They were known as the artisans. The word Toltec in the Nahuatl language means skilled artisan or master craftsman. So they held the knowledge of the math and the science of how to be master builders. They were like an architect's guild that was also holders of spiritual knowledge. So if you want to take a cross between carpenters and stonemasons union and the priesthood castes and pull them together, that's what the Toltecs were. For most of their history, they were not one genetic race. They had people from 5 different continents in the Mesoamerica area at one time, studying and working and coming together in this multicultural society as with the goal of spiritual growth and transformation. They specifically sought out deserted places in deserts, on mountaintops, away from other people so they could do their work uninterrupted. When you look at the history of Mesoamerica and what is now Mexico through Central America, there's a long, violent history of warfare between the various city-states. We only know portions of why that's the case. But when you're in a constant state of war, it's hard to do spiritual work. If you have any doubts about that, look around. On the evening news, if you still watch it, which I don't recommend, on the internet, and just the fact that we've been in a constant state of war since 2001. So that's deliberately planned. The instruction manual of how that works is George Orwell in 1930s wrote an instruction manual called 1984 on how to destroy a free population. And I think he wrote it as a warning, but I think our government's using it as a instruction manual, yeah, how-to book. So the Toltec artisans, they were an important part of every civilization, every culture that they were in. It was sort of like they could go from culture to culture and it's like, oh, the Toltecs are here, great, let's build something. Now we can build something. They knew how to build pyramids. They knew how to energize the pyramids with the energy needed to do the spiritual work. We have, fortunately, a continuous living continuous living lineage of the Toltec knowledge from the time of the last Toltec king, whose name was Sayacatl, in the 900s, up until now. And information is passed on from teacher to student to teacher to student and so on. And so I've gotten a lot of that information. The other thing we do in this shamanic lineage, and I suspect most, but I can't speak for any other shamanic lineage than my own, is we access things shamanically, meaning we can go into the higher planes and we can communicate across time. If anybody ever been to a Native American sweat lodge? Good, a few of you. The Native American sweat lodge is a very powerful sacred ceremony where you're putting yourself into deliberately uncomfortable situations. It's hot, you're sweating, and it's that same process of turning the iron into steel. You heat it and transform it. And the shaman who runs Sweat Lodge communicates with the ancestors of his lineage. And they come in and they support the sweat lodge, and they will tell him what the people there need. And so a Native American sweat lodge is a good example of that whole process of communicating with the ancestors. And all shamanic lineages I'm aware of, we do that. And in that process, we get information. Many, many times things have come up just related to the Toltec lineage that this is the way it was, quote unquote, and history, formal archaeology says, And then somebody finds something and says, golly gee whizzikers, those crazy shamans were right. And that keeps happening. I'm trying to remember, it was 2 or 3 years ago in the pyramids in Teotihuacan. They found some mercury and they found something else. I don't remember if it was the mica or just what it was that was used in the energy work that they did. That is part of the oral tradition, but nobody ever found it, so everybody ignored it. You'll notice with great interest, if you pay attention, that formal academics don't talk to each other very much. So the archaeologists don't talk to the linguists, who don't talk to the anthropologists or the historians, and on down the list, right? And that slows human progress. Because if they did, they'd find out a lot sooner what the right answers, the whole answers really were. And so when people want to know what goes on in the ancient times with the Toltecs and Toltec cities, what did they do? Gee, why don't we go ask the Toltecs? Because we're still here. And my teacher, Clearly the Blind, is a wealth of information about this. And he's tried to share as much as he could, but our brains weren't ready. So I keep asking questions, and then I remember some of it, and then I ask more questions, and oh yeah, I already told you that. Go look over here. Oh yeah, okay. So it takes a while to learn. And one of the ways the Toltecs used art was for spiritual transformation. So when you go and you look in the Mexican museums at the Toltec art, and you look at the Toltec ruins, and you can detect that because of this energy we're talking about, the Akagwa energy. And the artisans, that day-to-day process of doing their work, whether they were making something functional, like blacksmith, making a tool, or whether it was an art object that was going to be used for spiritual purposes. One of the little key secrets that the Toltec has is whatever task you're doing, you put all of your attention into that one thing and nothing else. You bring all your awareness from the past to right here. I'm making this one metal ring for whatever purpose. You don't worry about what you'll be doing tomorrow. You bring all that attention here. And then you put your effort and attention into making the most perfect ring you can. Maybe you're making chainmail, I don't know. I don't think the Toltecs had chainmail, they had other types of armor. And that ring would then hold your intent. And let's suppose you were making chainmail out of these rings. If you made a whole suit of chainmail with rings where every single one was put together with that level of intent, the finished product is gonna be so much better than the cheap phony stuff that you go down and you buy at the big box stores now, right? You go down to Chain Mailers Us and it's like, who wants that? It wouldn't stop anything. And then they had another trick that they would do. Let's say they're making rings for whatever, just a simple basic metal ring, iron, bronze, whatever. They'd make 10. And they'd line them up side by side. And they'd look at them and they'd judge them. And they'd pick the one best one and keep it. And all the others they would destroy. Throw it away. Back into the pot, melt it down, forge some new ones. And they'd make 10 more. Pick one and destroy the rest. Put it over here with that previous one. And then when you get 10 of those, they would assess those 10 and do it again. And they would do that until every one of those 1 out of 10s starts to look exactly the same at the highest standard they can create for themselves. And at that point, then they know they've replicated the process. And that might take weeks, it might take months, it might take years. And everything they made, they put everything into it as if their whole life depended on making one perfect ring. And not just this life, all their future lives, the whole success. If you believe in the binary heaven-hell thing, if your success of getting into that heaven depended on making one perfect ring, you would put everything into it. And then they would do that every day, all their life. And that process of putting everything into it did something which we call building personal power. And the best, some of you have asked me, how do I build personal power? You put your every level best effort into everything you do. You set an intent, and then you follow through and you do it. You do that. And every time your reservoir of personal power goes up and up and up, and it is definitely not just a hypothetical construct, it's intimately linked to this idea of the power, the Akadwa. And over years, when people would study with the Toltec shamans, the Toltec priests, they found that by working in small groups like this, they would make faster progress than if they tried to work alone, and faster progress than if they tried to work in large groups. It wasn't so much any other than the mastery of the power, mastery of the Akadwa, that the Toltecs did. It was the way they did what they did. They mastered every step. They knew how to make precise measurements when they were building pyramids. They knew how to make precise measurements when they were mixing metals to forge. They knew how to make precise measurements when they were gauging how much energy they needed to bring into a pyramid temple to do the transformative work that they did. And they mastered it. Everyone saw the movie 300? No?
Yeah.
The Greek movie. Oh, there's a story. It's a true story of Spartans and the city-state of Sparta and King Leonidas, and he and 300 warriors held off an army of over 10,000 Persians until they were betrayed and encircled, and then they all died. Well, the Spartans didn't have any better weapons than any other city-states and Greeks or the Persians. They didn't have any better battle tactics than anybody else. They all fought in that phalanx. With a thrusting spear, a short sword, and a shield, and they wore a helmet. And that was it. And they went to battle, right? Everybody else was doing the same thing. In that part of the world at that time, cavalry was almost unheard of. Archery, long-range archery was minimal. That's why they had this big shield. You can sit there and the arrows come raining down. There's a famous scene in that movie where, when the Persians threatened to wipe him out by raining arrows upon him, he says, oh, well, to the point that the arrows would block out the sun. And he said, then we'll fight in the shade. And there's a scene where that basically happened. But what the Spartans did from age 7, the men, boys, were trained as warriors, and a way that they absolutely mastered the use of those few weapons and their shield and that battle formation. And it's like the two prize fighters, the two best prize fighters in the world, and one of them is that much faster than the other. Just that much stronger. Over the course of the fight, his punches all last, or he hit land sooner, and they carry more force, and he wins. And that's what the Spartans did. Every single aspect of warfare they mastered to perfection. And at the height of the Spartan Empire, nobody messed with Sparta. And so that's the same philosophy the Toltec work is. When these old Toltecs went around and were part of every other culture, they were the builder class. They were the designers of this. They were the leaders in spiritual transformation. At some point, they shifted from being just this artisan caste and the priesthood caste into being the ruling caste. From what I can tell, it's because there were so many wars that killed so many people that there was a void left. There were no more priests, there were no more king general warriors. They were being wiped out. And so the Toltecs then stepped in and filled that void. And when they did, they tried to blend the two. They tried to blend secular rule with spiritual principles. And it worked pretty well for a time. And oral tradition in our Toltec culture says a lot of things that the historians don't. For instance, when you read this is a good book. I highly recommend it. It's called Ancient Mexico and Central America, Archaeology and Cultural History. And it's the cultural history aspects that I really, really like. And the author is Susan Toby Evans. And even in here, they make the mistake of not associating all the places where the Toltecs were and did things with the Toltecs. This is a trend that started somewhere between the 1950s and the 1980s, as far as I can tell. I have some books written in the 80s, and I have one or two earlier. And early on, a lot of credence was given to the Aztec stories. And the Aztec stories state that, oh, the Toltecs were here and here and here, and they did all this stuff, and that's where we got all our knowledge and our wisdom and everything good in our culture we got from the Toltecs. they viewed the Toltecs as this great, almost mythological super culture, super race, although they weren't a race. And that's where they got the knowledge from. And so it became very chic. Oh, buy my rings, they're Toltec. Oh, okay. I'll pay 5 times the price because they're Toltec, right? So it's theoretically possible that the truth got bent. But at some point, academia decided everything these ancient cultures said, especially about the Toltecs, but all the other old cultures, is all mythology. They didn't made it up. It's mythology. It's all the stories about the formation of the world and blah, 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 right? So all these Toltec stories, no, that never happened. No, we have the Teotihuacan culture, we have the Tula culture, we have the this culture, and the fact that Toltecs were in all of them confuses historians. The fact that the Toltecs weren't a genetic race confuses historians. The result of all that is that some of the best information about the Toltecs doesn't come from this book or any other book. You have to get it from the living lineage. So you get some of it from me, you can get a lot more from Coyote, you get it even more from Kachora, his teacher, who's still alive. Over 100 now, 102, 103, yeah. Still kicking ass, taking names,
Where's he?
teaching. He's down in Mexico. He's a Yaqui Indian. And yeah, if you want to go and meet him, let me know. I'll hook you up with Coyote, he'll hook you up with Kachora.
He works with you in the dreaming as well, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, or there's certain advanced levels of meditation that I work with him most days, even though I haven't been to his part of Mexico. So the Toltec legends report that at one time the culture spread over a large portion of North America, or the cultures that the Toltecs were in did that, as far north as Lake Michigan. I don't think historians want to hear that. That's like, we don't go there, right? So, yeah, if you don't have notarized documents from 8,000 years ago, the historians don't want to look at it. One of the enigmas of the Toltecs is they didn't write much down. At least they didn't write much down that has survived. They seemed to have ways of transferring information without writing. And the key is in the artwork. When you look at Toltec art, and you're trained to know that this is part of what you should be looking for, there's going to be clues about how you should look at it. It will give you clues of what posture you should adopt, what attitude or emotion you should induce in yourself, and then you send it the Akadwa energy, aka the power, and information that is stored in this artwork by the artist who held a specific intent to pass on certain information. You will receive that information. But you have to know what you're looking for. You have to know it's even possible. You have to be aware that you can transmit information across the generations through the energy field of these objects. So crystals do that really well.
there is a lot of new work being done in the field of genetics, and epigenetics plays a key role in that, especially through the matrilineal heritage. And these codon type things, these proteins, glom onto certain aspects of the DNA, whatever, and it has to do. Where I'm going is, when I was a very young person, I had a series of repetitive dreams, and they got less repetitive as I grew older. But there were 2 or 3 that were really key, and then they terrified me. Yeah, there were probably more than that. About 4 years ago, I was at my mother's. She is still alive. And somehow it came up in the conversation, and then I told her, years and years ago, I was like in my 20s, I used to have these recurring nightmares. And then I just sort of described 1 or 2 things, and she started spilling all this stuff, and my nightmares lined up with her childhood experiences. Identically, just it comes along.
There's what you're touching on and what you're describing is something called non-genetic inheritance. We talk about DNA and the genes, and that's why I'm a Paul Barbarian, and some of you aren't. And the DNA is a key part of the initial cell when the sperm fertilizes the egg, and boom, you've got now a complete set of genome, and then it starts doing its division thing, right? DNA isn't the only thing that happened. You have a whole maternal egg cell. And organelles like the mitochondria and anything else that might have been in that cell, like viruses and other things that can affect multiple generations down the road. And that developing fetus is developing inside the energy field of the mother and is exposed to the energy field probably of the father. And DNA is an antenna for receiving these subtle energies. So, yeah, that growing fetus receives not just stuff, but also information that's not part of the DNA, therefore not genetic.
There's biological evidence, and has been for forever, because I learned it in a class 20 years ago or more. There's a lot of evidence that parts of our human blood cell, or our human cells, period, inside the nucleus even, organelles, the evidence seems to indicate that they were once separate living creatures.
Oh yeah, that's clear.
That's the point I was trying to get to.
Anybody who studies biology in the 21st century learns that these little organelles, and we're a bunch of single-celled animals that lived in the ocean who learned to pog and go for a walk on land. So that's basically what we are. So this Toltec art is part of how the Toltecs transmit information. Generation to generation, you walk into the town, it's like, oh, well, let's go to the main, oh, that's where, okay, it's over there. Okay, so you transfer this information. You transmit the secret knowledge. It's held in the artwork. And so there's a lot of things that can be transmitted that way. And then still, we rely on this oral transmission, the oral instructions. It's the oral instructions that contain a lot of the how. how do we do certain things? So here in modern times, we are dealing with a culture that's highly complex and not conducive to high-level spiritual work. To do high-level spiritual work is a process. What the term we use is to upgrade our consciousness. So we use the analogy of a computer. You buy a computer, it's a great computer until you want to run a big program, you don't have enough RAM, so you buy more RAM and you stick it in. And then you need a higher quality screen, and then you need a bigger hard drive, and then you need a faster bus, and all the little gizmos and widgets that go into making a computer better, stronger, and faster, and upgrading it. And over time, that's what the Toltecs learned to do with our consciousness. The abilities and capabilities of our mind that we're born with is not what we're limited to. We go beyond that. And this is what I'm alluding to when I'm saying higher level work, especially in the Toltec path, is learning how to go direct. Question?
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
but that was a,
No, sorry.
no problem. If you do, just speak up. So the concept of upgrading your consciousness is a necessary steps from what the Toltecs, the way we look at the world. Because ultimately, we're here for a reason, individually and collectively. And it's a reason we basically agreed to before we incarnated. Like, okay, I need somebody to go down and do this. I need somebody to go down and do that. And it's like, okay, Kent, you look like a good fit. You agree? Great. Down you go. Press a button, poosh, here you are. And the birth process, not just the birth process, but the assimilation into a culture process is a required part to be able to come in here on this physical plane and do our work. I mean, if we can't speak the language, and we don't know how to eat the food, and we don't know why people get mad when we aren't wearing clothes, then we would be very ineffective at doing an important job in this culture. But at that early age, before we have our brain fully developed, we assimilate into the culture. That process wipes out the memory of why we're here. So a lot of spiritual work is aimed at remembering why we're here. We have a secret mission that we're on, so secret that not even we are told what it is.
Thank you.
Everything, huh?
Oh.
That makes it all clear, right?
But it's the only way to keep it secret. So.
Yeah, and actually,
Dang.
that's only partially wrong.
Oh, I know.
We are not ever given the fullness all at once for two main reasons. One is we don't want the dark side figuring out our playbook, right? And if you're 10 years old, it's like, oh, look what I'm supposed to do in the dark side. Oh, great. Well, the other reason is if most of us knew what it is we were supposed to do,
We wouldn't do it.
we wouldn't
Right.
do it. We'd run away screaming. We'd be like the engineer who takes the psychology test and finds out he's not logical, he's intuitive, and he goes, oh my God, I can't tell my friends. What are my other engineering friends going to think? And then that engineer, you tell him, oh, by the way, not only are you intuitive, you're going to be a shaman. It's like, I'd be out the door, right? If they told me that right up front. So they did. Good for them.
That would've been my
Spiritual.
reaction, though.
Go ahead.
That would have been my reaction. I said, yeah, whatever.
You would have been a better man than I was. Because I know, I would have. I literally took the psychology test that said I was intuitive, and I didn't want to tell anybody. How can that be? I took it again and cheated, trying to get a different answer, and even when I cheated, I got the answer that I was intuitive. So, the spiritual work revolves around the key process of learning to go direct, to access the spiritual dimensions, your higher spiritual states of your own consciousness, and get the information, that key piece of data of what you're here for. What is your true purpose? What are you here to do? A, and how to do it, B. And then doing it, C. So you got to know what to do, how to do it, and then you got to go do it. So if you, there's people can go to classes and seminars and workshops and read books and watch videos for decades trying to figure out how to do what I just said. Go direct and get that answer of what am I here to do. And I know people who've done it and taken the 20, 30 years. And
70.
yeah, some of us, that's what we needed. It took that long. It's like, okay, fine. You know, first we do it grudgingly, and then we go all in. There'll be something that happens if you're not all in at the start, and not all of us were. There will be a switch, some little branch point, and you'll have that little aha moment. Play the harps, the angels come down and sprinkle the glitter on you, and you got it right. Okay, now I'm going to go do what I'm going to do. So that is what higher level spiritual work is about. Is making contact and going direct and not needing a teacher and not needing a shaman and not needing the priest or the guru or any of that. You're going direct, you have your own hotline, and you're getting your answers, and you're doing your will. So any system, this is a caution, even if you're up for the high level spiritual work, you may not be up for my flavor of shamanism, so you're going to go out and look for some other system, and they're out there, is any system that tells you, oh, you're not allowed to go direct. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, no, you have to go through this, 18-step course over 20 years, and then you get to have, no. B-U-N-K. Bunk. Run away. Say, up yours very much, and I'm going to keep looking. Because that's false. Not only do you have the ability to go direct, you have an obligation to go direct. And any teacher who tries to tell you otherwise is false. So, I did all that work, right? I went and looked at, you name it, fill in the blank system. It was probably one that I studied. It was probably one that I put in my matrix. And I ended up here because of the fact that the Toltec brand of shamanism has all these things that others don't. First and foremost is the Ikadu energy, aka the power, and the knowledge of how to use it to enhance all the spiritual work we do. It can enhance all your healing work. If anybody is involved in any kind of holistic healing, whatever you do will be better if you use the Ikadu in conjunction with it. And you can use the Ikadu by itself. The other major piece we have is the knowledge of the assemblage point. This is the energetic structure in our energy fields. It is the filter and the lens between the chaos of the universe and this reality that we see. And in the Toltec system of philosophy, we learn how to control the assemblage point. That is an advanced technique. We don't teach it on the first day. We don't even teach it on the second day. You have to progress up. The Ikadwa energy is taught now. This is not the way it was done back then in the ancient Toltec times. It was taught then in the same process I've kind of described of friction. You're bumping up against a shaman. It's like taking an unmagnetized piece of iron and you rub it on a magnet, and after enough time, you've got a new magnet, just as strong as this one. And that's what we do with our energy fields and our light bodies when we work in a Toltec group, Toltec party, we call it. And that's what people used to have to hang around the shaman and work in there, because that was the only way to get your power built up, was rubbing the friction between your light bodies and the shamans. And that still goes on. It's going on right now, whether you realize it or not. And now we have the ability to transmit that energy in a series of steps. You can't go from 1 to 5 like that, because it's like going to the gym. You've never lifted weights before, and somebody throws a 500-pound barbell on you and go to work. It's like you hurt yourself, right? So high levels of energy can damage your energy bodies, possibly in ways that would prevent you from doing the higher level work later on. So we do it in steps. We get it in Ikadwa level 1. And after a certain amount of time, you can have a level 2, and you work your way up. And the time between levels goes up and up and up, right? Level 1 to 2 can be done in a month. Level 2 to 3 should be done in several months. Level 3 to 4, it might be years. For many people, it was years. For some of us, it was a lot less than that, and a lot more intense. You're welcome, guys. They all owe me money. So I was the first person in this newly released energy. The energy was only released in 2007. I was the first one to go through that process of moving from level 3 to level 4, and there was a lot of discomfort, to put it mildly. And then shortly after me, 3 others went through it, and then for years we were the only 4 who had moved into level 4. And we were way showers. The work that we did and the fact that we survived and helped Coyote, our teacher, put together a process whereby it doesn't take months of agony. Now it's just 1 week of agony. So
Or 3 or 20.
no, it's only a week. And so
If you survive.
if you survive, and not everybody survives. I was down co-teaching a class. Coyote's training me how to do that, and hopefully, if I get enough students who survive until the fall, we may have our first level 4 class up here in the Northland. And one person didn't survive. They ran away screaming on day 2, morning of day 3, something like it's out of the week. Yeah, day 2, I think. So it happens. Not everybody makes it.
And not everybody's cut out for this work either. You know, I mean, there's.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
It's hard. I'll tell you right now, the Toltec work is the most efficient way of doing that work, to raise your consciousness, to upgrade your consciousness, to establish those connections, and figure out your true will, and then helping you do it. It's more efficient than anything else I looked at. It is the most rewarding work I've ever done. And I will not lie and tell you it's easy, because it's not. It's hard. It is difficult. You start to work at the beginning of the day, no matter what you're doing. The Toltec work is big on every single thing you do is a spiritual act, and it's part of your spiritual work. You're going to brew tea. You brew it as if this was a secret magic potion and elixir that is gonna get you into heaven or not. You put all your energy into here. So when Bonnie makes food, when she makes tea, she's charging it with energy, and that energy feeds our higher bodies. That's part of this transmission. It's like you're filling a 55-gallon drum with an eyedropper, one drop at a time. And then you walk over to the stream a mile away, you get one drop, and you bring it back and you put it in. And that's the process. Every day, all day, whatever you do, you put everything you have into it. You combine it with the Akadwa. We have meditation techniques. We have techniques to develop your attention. And there's a system, a progression through classes and workshops and the skills that go in to make up this Toltec armamentarium and the consciousness skills. And I wish I'd found it when I was, and been open to it when I was in my 20s rather than waiting until my 40s to find it. But I'm here, right? So
Better late than never.
better late than never,
And you're
exactly.
still alive.
And I'm still alive. Yeah. One of my criteria for this lifetime was I was supposed to make it to 2012 without killing anybody and without being killed. So I made it. And that would then enable me to do the work that I'm here to do. So far so good. I haven't taken any heads off yet this lifetime. And hopefully I won't have to. So the Toltec history is intimately connected with many of the cultures from Mesoamerica and North America. And that knowledge they held, that sacred knowledge of using sacred geometry and science and math and building these spiritual temples of transformation and building these works of art and being those master craftsmen, master builders, the precursors to what we call the Toltecs have been in almost every major culture throughout the history of humanity. This information was always brought through. It was always there, though not always listened to. Humanity's always had these resources. And it's just a question of, do we want to engage? The main thing you have to do with the Toltec work, if you're going to add some of this to your personal practice, is engage. There's an adage that goes around sometimes, what's the difference between a person who cannot read and a person who does not read?
Trying. One can't.
Nothing.
Bingo. There's no difference. If you know how to read and choose not to, you gain no new knowledge. If you don't know how to read, you don't have the ability to gain knowledge. The end result is no new knowledge. Not that you can't be taught things, but I mean, the number one way we have of passing information on from generation to generation in these modern times is reading. Right? So if you don't want to read, then you've limited your options. So the same can be said of your spiritual practice. If you're working with the Ascended Masters and you're supposed to be saying decrees to the Ascended Masters every day, then do it. Go do that. Whatever your practice says, go do it. And if you do it with the Akadwa turned on, it'll be better. The Akadwa is physics. It's not anything unique to a religion. I would describe shamanism as physics, not religion. It's the ability to use and understand energy and frequencies to access higher planes and move information and move energy. Shamanism does that better than any other system, in my opinion. So what you do with that information, how you use that information, what you do with that open door that the Akadwa and the Toltec techniques can open, that's up to you. my advice is do something good for the benefit of all beings everywhere.
Mhm.
That's my advice. Questions?
I had a comment.
Yes.
So I was doing a little bit of research, actually in that book. And no, actually, I got led. I think that the point I'm trying to make is that there's unlocking the meanings of the art using the Akagua. And then there's also the fact that there is physical writing or physical language that's in the art. And one thing I found interesting in what I keep reading about Teotihuacan as a temple complex, because there's a lot of controversy. It's one of the biggest, more grandiose ones, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of discrepancy about who built it and when it was built. And so I think we have been talking about the Nahual language, which is the remnants of an indigenous language found through Central America. And basically one of the controversies they have for dating it is that the artwork itself is made in the Nahual language. So I don't know how yet they're actually reading that, but the majority of the artwork at Teotihuacan is the Nahual language. And yet then they argue about, well, it couldn't have been built at this date because the Nahual language wasn't here yet. So, in other words, they let little things like that. I think that it's a structure that could be dated, but obviously there's a lot to the way it was constructed. But what's interesting is the way that you can be led in your research. So, for example, I was on kind of a completely different subject. I know quite a bit, having been from the West here, about these huge prehistoric inland lakes. So like the Great Basin and Bonneville Lake in Utah, and where all that water came from and where all that water went, and the way it shaped and sculpted the area. So when we were considering who were these indigenous people and what was the landscape, what did it look like 1,500 years ago? So I was just doing a little research about the Great Basin, which had some maps that basically showed an association with a early Native American culture that they were calling Uto-Aztecan, which is completely unrelated to a lot of the other languages, and yet it has kind of a broad spectrum where some of the Plains Indians and so forth have roots in this language, and it also goes down to Central America as well. And at the north end, it's related to the Shoshone language, and at the south end, it's related to the Papil people who were in El Salvador.
So it's a root language. Perfect.
Yes, and the Papil people are actually who Coyote's genetic lineage, I believe, comes from. He's mentioned, it's one of those things where you'll hear things over and over and over again in these different Toltec discussions, and then all of a sudden one day it clicks. Okay, so it's like, what are the chances that these two seemingly completely different spaces and completely different groups were speaking a root language that was the same? And when you look geographically on the map of where the pockets of that language either still exist or were in their height, they're in many of these places that we've been talking about the Toltec possibly being.
In Colorado, I went to high school briefly in Colorado Springs. In that general region, there is a mountain range called the Sleeping Ute.
Hmm.
And there's more, but that's enough for the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's these interesting connections, that, I mean, I found that one on Wikipedia, you know, but what was it that drew me to even looking at that in the first place? And what are the chances that just looking at something about the Great Basin and some ancient culture that's associated with that and its connection then right into the heart of Central America and in our lineage.
And what I think that information you found is showing is that, yeah, that language could have been there earlier when Teotihuacan was built. Is kind of where I think that's going, right?
Yeah, well, obviously that it was there when it was built.
Yeah.
It was because it's in the art in the structure.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter what the academics want to argue about, you know.
Well,
it
what
was-
I'm getting is it's all one. It's just like different dialects of a language. It's all one.
Yeah.
It's all the same language.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Was the term you said Ute Azteca?
Uh-huh.
So in Greek, Ute means not. So say for instance, like you're talking about like
It's
you know, a lot
not
of people talk
Aztec.
about utopia.
Not
Utopia.
Aztec.
Like that's what
Uto or
you-
was it Uto or Ute? Anyway,
Yeah, it's Uto, and I think it's referring to Utah because that's where some of the
That's a
geographical area
linguistic
was.
change.
it's just interesting because Toltec is, as you were putting out, it's not Aztec. So
Right.
in Greek, Ute means not. So
Oh.
like,
Yeah.
utopia means
interesting.
utopia means like place. So people talk about utopia, it doesn't exist. It's the not place, utopia.
Okay.
So I just think that's interesting.
It
Maybe
is
like not
interesting.
Aztec, something different.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
definitely predated there. That's very interesting. And so the this language, the Ute, in this case, there was a Native American tribe called the Utes, spelled in English UTE,
It's just-
and that's where the state of Utah gets its name, and then the Sleeping Ute Mountains. They're talking about the same tribe.
And in downtown Colorado Springs, the main boulevard, it's spelled differently. Locally, it's pronounced Uinta, but it's Winta.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes like a cross.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have one. So you were talking earlier, you were talking about like evolution, right? And like there's like an individual evolution and it's adjacent to like our collective evolution, right?
Yes.
So what do you think is hindering that at an individual and collective level? Is it that people aren't seeking out this Toltec knowledge? Because I mean, it's different personality types, right? So some people, it's an unregistered interest of large masses of people to even be interested or inculcated with this
Right.
train of thought. So in your perception, like what is hampering our evolution in your perspective?
It's hard enough if people were allowed to just progress, right? To try and get large groups together and moving in the same direction at the same time. Because of my engineering background, I use a lot of physics analogies like lasers and coherent light versus the random light from an incandescent bulb, right? So the same can be said of if you light some incense or you have something generating smoke, you'll get that laminar flow for a while. It's all smooth, and then it just breaks down into chaos. So you get too many people trying to do things together. We're spending too much time not in the laminar flow, not in the chaos. And so we're just dealing with societies and cultures, and it's like, oh my gosh, that he has a lot of physics knowledge and he's got all this spiritual, but he's got long hair and a beard. I don't know if I could trust somebody who has a guy who has long hair and a ponytail and so we have all these biases. That's one thing. It's hard enough without people throwing deliberate stumbling blocks in the way. And for at least the last 75 to 100 years here in West, so-called Western culture, we have had the stumbling blocks thrown in our way through social engineering, through deliberate brainwashing technologies in television and TV, Just look at the way everything has become so ultra polarized right now on every issue, and it's that divide and conquer. And just getting people to recognize that they're being played on every social issue and to step out of that and say, where's the puppet master? Deal with the puppet. So that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem historically is that humanity has had rises and falls throughout our history, and our history is way longer than anybody wants to talk about in these official history books. We didn't just crawl out of caves for the first time 10,000 years ago and start grunting and pointing, and suddenly in 5 years we're sending rockets to outer space, right? We have a long history, and part of that history involves major screw-ups and the karmic responsibility of blowing up continents and killing millions of people is being borne by the whole race. So that's another layer of complexity on it. And there's other layers of complexity too. Some of the people who have been killed, some of the races that have been wiped out in history were for that time way showers, people whose neurological systems were different. And it was easier in those cases. They had different, not only physical neurological systems, but they had different energy body systems. And it was easier for them to communicate with the higher planes. And what we have now is, without that influence in our society and our culture, we are undertaking a very long process of deliberately guiding humanity to upgrade our consciousness and learn to go into the higher bodies and create changes there, because then they trickle down plane by plane and eventually get back these capabilities that we were starting to develop as a race tens of thousands of years ago. So we have a lot of blocks. We have layers upon layers and layers of blocks. And then now we're being deliberately played. And you try to point out to people, hey, look, there's chemtrails in the sky, or look what the media just said, And it's like, even in these books, it's like they don't agree on the definitions. In this and two other books we were comparing, they all said, oh, the Toltec culture started in 900 and went to 1100. And it started when the last Toltec king was overthrown. And then this happened. And wait a minute. This is like my first grade church thing, right?
Yeah.
It's, how could the last Toltec king being overthrown in roughly 960 AD be the start of the Toltec culture, or the only part of the Toltec culture the history books acknowledge? If he was the last king, that would have been the end, not the start. So clearly there's inconsistencies in history. Where did the wives come from for Adam and Eve's sons? That was the question that got me into trouble. That's what I'm alluding. It's like, wait a minute, wait. 2 and 2 is 4, and then, wait a minute, where are these other? Anyway, another story, another day. So we have to know it's possible. We have to believe it's possible. Just a couple weeks ago, I was using an analogy of Roger Bannister. You remember Roger Bannister?
No.
Broke the 4-minute mile.
Yeah, he was the first guy to break the 4-minute mile. He was a British guy. And for years, he and a few other people had been getting out 4:02, 4:03, 4:01.9. And the best runners in the world were right up against that 4-minute barrier, and nobody could break it. And it was declared to be impossible. But he was looking at a lot of things about biology and physiology. He was a medical student, became a doctor. And he said, I think it's possible. And so he put together a training plan. He changed the way he trained to run the mile compared to anybody else. He put all this stuff together, little bit by little bit. He was being very Toltec-like in a way. And he went out on the day that this happened, and he ran a 3:59.6. He broke it by 0.4 of a second. And when they were announcing the time to the crowd, everybody knew he was first. In a time of 3 minutes, and then the crowd erupted, and nobody heard how many seconds and tenths, right? It's just like they had to wait till everybody calmed down, and then they announced it again, right? Within 3 months, I think a dozen other people had broken the 4-minute mile. Why? They believed it was possible. Now they, Bannister, I beat him in whatever, right? I can do it, right? Everybody wanted to do it then, and
He was
everybody
a
knew it
way
was possible.
short.
Yeah, he was. He showed that it could be done. And so we have a lot of blocks out there where people don't think things are possible. You know, it's all science fiction, and it's all fantasy, it's all, oh no, you know, and just the way things get reported on the media, it's like, you don't really believe that, do you? Actually, I do. You know, it's, if you look and analyze what goes on in the media, in the magazines, and the internet, and hopefully you don't watch TV anymore, but that's what we're faced with. We're faced with deliberate cultural and social engineering to prevent it. And we'll never get the masses to do it, right? But we don't need the masses. We just need little pockets here and here and here of people doing the consciousness work and the Toltec work. And one of the things we talk about in a consciousness seminar later this year is exactly how to change the collective consciousness using these coherent waveforms from these small groups. You don't have to get everybody, you just need a certain critical mass to flip the tipping point. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah. Your question.
Well, I think, kind of drawing on some of these ideas, I think an important thing that everyone needs to admit that they need to accept in order to move forward too is that it's not just the last 100 years. The last 100 years technology has allowed them to ramp it up, but it's been like over 2,000 years, basically, since they, robbed the sun religions and the mushroom cults and took all their information together and bastardized it and turned it into something that nobody can access. Higher information cannot speak to God. And
Right.
it kind of kept everybody in this pit for the last 2,000 years. And what's
Yeah.
really interesting to me is that our culture is like obsessed with this show, Game of Thrones, and there's this huge wall that they've built in this show, and nobody knows what's beyond the wall. And everyone's like, caught up in their wars and all their stuff. And there's rumors of dragons around the other side of the planet. And everyone's fascinated by this. But in real life, we have these 3 giant pyramids that people are trying to decode and show them the information, show them the mathematics, try to describe to them what these things could have possibly been used for. These genuine mysteries that are just as grand and beautiful as this fiction, and nobody gives a shit.
Right.
And it's
But that, in a way, it is soft disclosure.
yeah,
It is.
Just like the movie Avatar, just like a lot of the movies are leaking stuff out bit by bit because they've bought into the notion that the human race is so fragile that we couldn't possibly handle the truth if it was told to us.
well, yeah, I think
I think it's fine.
yeah, just admitting that these mysteries are that great, and that the amount of evil and suppression is that great. That
So
maybe when
that
is-
when these researchers tell you, hey, the lineage of the Bushes and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers goes back to the Egyptian kings, and that they've been pulling this bullshit on us for over 2,000 years.
Thank you,
Illuminati.
But like,
So,
you have to admit that the world actually is this
in terms of writing,
crazy.
anything you want to say about that
What do you mean?
in your writing?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I guess
Okay.
I could try.
You had a question, Yvonne.
No.
You
I
were
just
waving
said-
your hand.
No, I was just,
Oh,
she,
gesticulating wildly.
yeah.
Okay, that's my job. Sorry.
No, I do it.
Your question then.
It's changed now since Kim spoke, but yes, and brilliant and beautiful. And I have a piece of that for anyone who doesn't know, ask questions, because I've got a lot of pieces. But
Do you have a question?
yeah, I did.
When you remember it, chime in,
Why
yes.
don't you share the book?
Going back
Which book?
to his question
Why?
about
Why? Now, oh,
what, why we're where we're at.
Yeah.
good.
You said something earlier. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but in the way you said it is different than I've heard it before. But basically, we've got this technological advance, and you got to admit what's happened in the last 100 years is phenomenal in comparison to the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. But that we're devoid of spirituality, and I think the key, because there's a lot of religions out there, but not very many people are spiritual. They do these dogmatic rituals and so forth, but they really don't understand. They don't push the envelope. They're just trying to get off on good behavior. And so this idea of being spiritual has been big for me all my life, just because I still have a hard time with the religious stuff, the dogmatic stuff, sitting through church for 3 hours or whatever. But bringing that level of spirituality to everything is kind of part of us, and we don't realize that we're part of this whole ecosystem. That the birds and the bees and the animals and everything, they all get it. They all work together. Sometimes you'll see imbalances, like when an anthill starts devouring everything around it, and then you see pretty soon they're going to die out, or they're going to be foraging really far because they've killed everything in their immediate environment.
Yeah, that's when you see the explosion of anteaters.
And so
we need some in Dunsmuir.
but we don't seem to get that as humans. We think we're outside of that circle of life, and so we do.
Well, it goes right back to Kent, right? That's what we were taught for 2,000 years, deliberately by certain churches who shall be named nameless.
I heartily recommend this book.
The
Coyote's
Dreaming book by Coyote, yeah. So what else?
Oh, the other point was just that I think we're at a critical point in humanity as well. A lot of people talk about the different dimensions, 3rd dimension, 4th dimension to 5th dimension, but essentially, we are getting to that critical mass, but the Earth itself seems like it's going through its own upgrade and its own changes, and that doesn't happen in every lifetime, or it seems to be cyclical. But on one hand, we have the advantage of being here to witness it and take part of it in it and contribute to it, and at the same time, there's a lot going on that for thousands of years nothing's really happened, and now we've got icebergs melting down and chemtrails everywhere, and all that. So we have a lot of other stuff to deal with in our reality than has been present for a while.
Yeah, they call it the information age, and we get more raw information. I'll get the statistics wrong, but you'll get the principle. In a day than people even 200 years ago got in their entire life. We're exposed to more actual information and facts and raw data. Unfortunately, we are not exposed to the knowledge and wisdom about what to do with that data. So wisdom does not equal information, or information does not equal wisdom, I guess would be a more appropriate way to say it.
Yeah.
Now you have a question.
Yes, I do. So do you recommend getting a hold of some Toltec art, like in books or whatever, and gazing at it? Like it was a yantra or something?
I think you have to be at the actual piece, and you can do that physically by going to the museums that hold it, or you can do it astrally.
Okay.
I have a friend who happened to be passing through San Jose, and sometime previous to that, he had had some sort of missing time experience. And when he was in, I forget the name of the museum, but it's like the Rosicrucians or something,
by San Francisco, I think.
It's in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's in San Jose near San
Yeah, that's
Francisco.
there is the Rosicrucian Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was walking through that and saw a statue of Akhenaten, and he was just frozen and started getting this download. And he went home and started drawing and writing, and I have his first run of his book, the first one, and he's written several since then.
Well, no, it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
And
boom,
Egypt-
and now he denies it, but yeah.
He denies it.
He says, yeah, that didn't really happen.
Why do you think that is?
It's on his own path.
I don't know. Anyway, Egypt and the Toltecs both go back to the same source. So I have no doubt, but there's a lot of, especially the older Egyptian artwork, that the same is true. You can get the energy off of it. And I'm reconsidering my answer a minute ago. You might be able to get that from some of the Toltec artwork. I know you can get it just from the writing, like Coyote's books, like that one and his other one. And people have told me they get it off the Akadu book. So,
It seems like
Yeah,
if
I
it
heard
was
that today.
photographed with intent. So if the photographer, was really in the moment when they were taking those photographs and they weren't just taken superficially. But I would think like real photographs from a museum exhibit rather than just something that's mass produced, on the internet would be a better source.
I do believe personally in response to that it has to do with the particular builder, maker, artisan, craftsperson, whatever. It has a lot to do with their own pursuit of their personal highest possible level of excellence that prepares the way for them to receive that information when they see something.
let me make sure I understand what you just said. You're talking about the original creator of the artwork had to have the intent.
And the person viewing it, the higher they're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
vibrate,
Okay.
the more they're gonna take in.
It wasn't
It's
clear to
like-
me what.
I know.
Yeah,
It's
okay,
like this.
so, yeah, the artwork had
It's
to have
like a
been,
reducing valve and then it comes.
there you go, getting technical.
I'm sorry.
So,
What do I know?
a lot, apparently.
No.
So yeah, the artisan who creates the piece has to have an intent and put that in there with the energy. And then the person viewing it has to be open to it. Now, when somebody, quote unquote, random person walking by gets the download from the statue, they probably really weren't a random person.
Exactly.
They have either a genetic lineage relationship or a soul lineage relationship to that culture, as I did with the Toltecs, which is another reason why I was drawn here. And
Jung has a book with a photo in it. It's the big arty one.
The red one?
But no, I haven't seen the red book. But I never got past page 5 or 6 because I opened to this color plate and I went, and he identified it as Ramses, and I went, but look at his body, that's Akhenaten. So who knows, but that kind of thing happens.
are you saying books
Frequently.
get published with errors
No. that
deliberately or
wouldn't happen.
inadvertent?
That's why that's
Aye.
important to me to kind of be
You
precise.
just blown my whole world.
Oh, good. My
Errors
work
in
here is
books?
done.
Oh, what is it coming to?
Well, I just want to speak
That's
to that and
hard.
the fact that there is a knowing, and especially when it has to do with your path. I've read a lot of things where I'm just like, well, that's not true, or
Yeah.
that's right, that's the way it happened. And how would I know? I've never been there. I haven't done any other research on it.
Bingo.
But in the moment, and so that is something that we're bringing through with us, and we'll, you'll see a lot of those things on your path where it's stuff that you brought in with you, and you just need to relearn it. You just need to be re-exposed to it, and it's like all of a sudden you've got the whole thing without even reading the whole book. You got the concepts, you understand it, and so I think that's a very real thing that happens in those
That's
places.
called intuition. And what's important I want all of you to understand, because when I finally learned this, it helped me tremendously, is that Intuition is a higher capability of the mind than is logic. And when I find, like I was joking earlier, I was horrified when I found out I was intuitive, because what self-respecting engineer didn't want to be logical, right? Of course I want to be logical, I want to do it. But when I started finding the different spiritual work that were legitimate, and I had found some authors that I liked and was reading them, and then one of them explained that intuition is a higher capability of mind than just mere logic. And I go, oh, well, I'm intuitive. What do you know? And it made all the difference for me, right? So let me just encourage everybody, male and female alike, that intuition is something we should nurture. And I've gotten to a point in my life where I almost amaze myself at some of the things I know intuitively and turn out to be correct. So go with it. Don't doubt it. I mean, you have to go through a process where you check yourself. Okay, I intuitively think this is the answer. Now I'm going to double check. And after a while, you start to realize, okay, I have this skill in certain areas. And for me, certain aspects of healing work were where I started with that. And now I've branched out into others. And you get good at it, and you just embrace the intuition. It's like you jump on that bandwagon and you go.
Something else you just mentioned, I think is an important part of the process of the Toltec wisdom is actually testing your results. You know, like a scientist, you have a theory about something, or, oh, well, that worked this time, so what if I try it again? Is that going to work? And testing that results, because that's really how you learn and how you find out things for yourself. You can read books all day long, but until you actually experiment, you don't really know for yourself.
Yeah.
So I think that wouldn't you say that's part of
Absolutely.
part of the way as studying in the Toltec way that we.
If you don't test yourself, then you're just living in delusion. Yeah, and you make up the world however you want. I think it's this way. This is my theory. So if you don't close that loop, in fact, science textbooks talk about the scientific method. They say, oh, you have a hypothesis, you run an experiment, and then you have a conclusion. That's incomplete. They left out the first part, which is you observe the universe to develop the hypothesis. And then at the end, you're supposed to take that conclusion and have the feedback that says, was my hypothesis correct? And so when I was teaching college physics, that's what I would do. I would draw in these other parts, and that's what I would make them do. And they're like, oh, okay. And so my students got it, right? But that's not what's in the textbook. That's not what people are being taught at large in science these days. You have to have that feedback, because otherwise, you don't know for sure.
Well, that's how we learn, with feedback.
Not anymore.
I know, but as children.
Yeah, that's not what they're teaching out there in the world. And so, yes, in the Toltec path, we would be the rigorous ones to require you to have that feedback. It's like, oh, I'm going into the astral, and I'm seeing all this great and wonderful stuff and all this. And it's like, oh, and the lottery numbers are this, and pay me money, and you go away. And it's like, well, the lottery numbers come in. You know how every January you go to the supermarket tabloid that first week, and it's like, all the famous psychics have their prediction for the year. And everybody buys the stuff. Do you ever remember seeing those issues in the last week of December that says, here's the feedback on all the psychics that predicted stuff this year and what really happened compared to what they predicted? You ever see that issue? No, they don't ever publish that one, do they? Because they'd be mostly wrong. And then people realize that, oh, well, these so-called professional psychics are phonies, or most of them. And then the tabloids wouldn't sell as many tabloids. So they never publish that feedback. Doesn't happen. Any last questions? Okay. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
We do this most Mondays, not every Monday. Some we have conflicts. But thank you for being here, and make sure you get some of our literature for you newcomers, so you have our contact, you have our website, you have our emails, etc. All right,